Good evening and welcome to the ATL's Redefining the Ride Express 2.0 virtual public meeting. My name is Tiffany McCall. I'm Director of Communications and Media for the Authority, and we just want to welcome you to our virtual webinar. It is exactly 6:31, so we will allow everyone at least 5 minutes to come into the webinar, and then we will kick things off. So again, we'll put this on hold for approximately 5 minutes, and we will go directly into the webinar. All right, welcome back. Again, my name is Tiffany McCall. I'm Director of Communications and Media for the ATL. We were giving everyone a grace period to come into the chat, so it is now officially 6:35 p.m. and we can officially kick things off for this webinar. You can advance the slide. All right, so for those of you who don't know or may be unaware about why we are here today, this is all about Redefining the Ride Express 2.0. The Atlanta Region Transit Link Authority launched a regional study in 2024, and this was a study called Redefining the Ride Express 2.0. You've probably heard all the news and buzz around it. This study was put into place to assess commuter travel patterns. It was also created to evaluate existing commuter bus service levels, identify potential service changes for the express bus system to better match commuter demands. In 2024, the ATL board adopted system-wide recommendations the summer of 2024. During this time, redefined corridor service plans were developed. In the winter of 2024, they were developed and shared on the Return to Ridership website and publicly. Proposed changes, that's what we are here for today. We are sharing with you the proposed changes, and they will be available for input through February the 12th. So you will get a full rundown of the changes that are being proposed, and you will have time to make public comment or provide input up until February the 12th. Implementation for this full study and project will take place or is expected to take place June 2025. As stated earlier, my name is Tiffany McCall. I will be your moderator for this event. Kane Williamson, our Deputy Executive Director, will be one of the panelists and speakers leading and sharing information, along with Hunter Abel, Senior Transportation Planner. The presentation will consist of sharing the Express proposed changes. This will take approximately 30 minutes. And we will finish things off with a Q&A, question and answer session, which we will allot 30 minutes or more. So we're here to put out the information and to readily answer any questions that you may have. Just for some general housekeeping rules, add your questions in the Q&A box. You'll see that at the bottom of your screen. And we will also follow up. We're definitely going to compile and to take in all of your questions, and we'll follow up with answers to your questions on the Return to Ridership webpage. All right, turning it over to Kane Williamson.
Thanks, Tiffany. I appreciate that introduction. I'm going to just sort of set the stage for the more detailed presentation, which Hunter will pick up. But just to give you an idea about what we're going to be talking through today, we're going to look at the Express system as it is constructed today. I'll tell you a little bit about our system. I'm guessing many of you are riders, so you probably know the system fairly well, but we want to make sure that we set the stage right by explaining the existing system. And then we'll talk about how the pandemic impacted our ridership and how ridership has changed since the pandemic, just to sort of set the stage for the rationale behind some of the changes that we'll be proposing in the balance of the presentation. And then we will talk about the study itself and move into the discussion of the proposed service plan changes, which Hunter will walk through. We'll do those in a fairly detailed way. Then tell you about what the implementation timeline is from here, and then, as Tiffany mentioned, have a Q&A session. So please don't hesitate to put your questions in the Q&A box. As Tiffany mentioned, we'll answer as many of those questions as we can tonight, and those that we can't answer tonight because we ran out of time, we'll answer in writing in one way or another. So Hunter, if you can move us forward. Thank you. So just a little bit about our existing system today. We do operate the Express service. The ATL does operate the Express service in the 13 county metropolitan Atlanta region. We focus on delivering people from the suburban areas of the region into the major employment centers in downtown, midtown, and perimeter center. We operate 27 routes from 27 separate park and ride lots, and we have 55 bus stops in downtown, midtown, and the perimeter area. We are an express bus service, which is an important distinction as compared to a local bus service. And so we will continue to operate express services as well. So the pandemic hit most all express bus services across the country pretty hard. Any type of service, transit service that was focused on delivering passengers to traditional office markets had pretty serious downward shifts in ridership as a result of people being able to work from home, work hybrid schedules, those sorts of things. So Express's current ridership is about 30% of what it was in the pre-pandemic era. We have reduced some service over the course of the pandemic to account for the ridership declines that we saw, but we are at this point still operating more service than is being consumed by passengers on the system. And as I mentioned, we anticipate this is largely due to people continuing to work remotely or work hybrid schedules, particularly in office job markets. And in addition to that, we have seen some financial impacts in the post-pandemic era. Depressed ridership also means depressed fare revenues, and so we are collecting less in fares than we did in the pre-pandemic era. And in addition to that, the legislature reduced its contribution to our budget by $4 million in fiscal year 25, and encouraged us to undertake this study and then adjust service levels accordingly so that we could increase the efficiencies of the system. So that is the rationale for the undertaking of the Redefine the Ride effort. Can we move to the next slide? So with that, I think oh no, I got one more slide. I'm sorry. So just a sort of a high level of understanding about what this effort will propose. And then, as I said, Hunter will get into the more detailed level of explaining the specifics in each of the quarters. But essentially what we will be doing is adjusting and or eliminating underutilized routes, trips, and park and ride lots. And so you will see that in some of the quarters that we serve, several routes have been consolidated into a single route, and the number of trips that are being offered on those routes have been reduced. And in some cases, we are proposing to eliminate service to a number of park and ride lots. The park and ride lots that we propose to cease serving are mostly those that we lease. And so that will help us save on lease costs if we eliminate the service to those lots. And all of this is to better align the amount of services we're offering with the amount of services being consumed by riders out there today. We expect these routes will more efficiently serve the major corridors, as I was mentioning. And the other significant change is that there are a couple of routes that will not come all the way into downtown and midtown, and instead will serve MARTA stations, and so that people will transfer to those stations and then head into their ultimate destinations. And now I think that it's Hunter's turn to pick up and talk about the more detailed aspects of the plan. Hunter?
Yes, thank you, Kane. So I'm going to skip to the next slide here. All right, so as Kane mentioned, we're going to go through the proposed service plan in detail by corridor. So we're going to talk about the number of routes, the number of park and rides, what type of frequency is proposed for the corridor, and ultimately how those impacts may impact you as a current rider and some alternatives for you. So we're going to start off with, I know this is a lot to take in, but we're going to start off with a system-wide view first. So this is really meant as a starting point for our presentation tonight on how the overall system looks based on the proposed changes. So we'll walk through each of these corridors one by one, as I mentioned earlier. However, some key changes I wanted to point out from a system-wide point of view. So right now, Express operates 27 routes across Metro Atlanta. Under the service plan proposed today, 12 routes are proposed for discontinuation, leaving 15 routes remaining across the corridors. There's 9 park and rides that are proposed for closure, while 2 of them are currently served by, while 2 currently served by Ride and Gwinnett are proposed for express service. And we'll go into that when we talk about the 85 North corridor. But ultimately, that would leave 20 park and rides open for express users to access the system. And then, as Kane mentioned earlier, we do have 2 corridors that we're proposing to end at MARTA stations, the Georgia 400 corridor and the 85 South corridor. And then ultimately, the number of trips being reduced ranges from about 50 to 75%, depending on the corridor there. So next, we're going to go into what that means from a corridor level, and how those impacts might impact you as a current customer. Get my cursor here. All right, so we're going to start with I-20 East, and then we're going to work our way counterclockwise around the perimeter. And then we'll end with the Midtown and downtown routing, so you can see what the routes look like in town and where the bus stops will be located. So starting off with the 20 East corridor, today it's served by 3 routes and 3 park and rides. So we've got the express route 423, 426, and 428 at Panola Road, West Conyers, and East Conyers park and rides. These routes provide direct service to downtown and midtown Atlanta, as well as perimeter center, with service running roughly every 30 minutes during the morning and afternoon service windows. So the proposed service reduces this corridor down to 1 route and 2 park and rides, with the modified Route 426 serving both the Panola Road and West Conyers park and rides. So this route is proposed to continue direct service to downtown and midtown. However, the frequency of buses is proposed to decrease from roughly every 30 minutes, depending on which park and ride you're using today, to about every 50 minutes during the morning and afternoons. So again, the primary service impacts for the I-20 East corridor would be customers that are using the East Conyers park and ride today would need to shift to either the West Conyers or Panola Road park and rides, with the West Conyers park and ride being about a 7 or 9 minute drive further along I-20 from the East Conyers lot. And before I advance, I'll note that while the exact schedules are not shown on the slide here, you can visit the Redefining the Ride website for all of the proposed trip times, as well as the in-town stop locations for each route. And that's accessible on Xpress's website at expressga.com. So next is the US 78 or the Stone Mountain Freeway corridor. So today this corridor is served by 1 route, the 419, and that hits the Stone Mountain, Hewitt Road, and Snellville park and rides. So this route again provides direct service to downtown Atlanta today, with service roughly every 15 to 30 minutes, depending on what time of the morning or evening you're catching the bus. The proposed service reduces this corridor down to 2 park and rides, with Route 419 continuing to serve Hewitt Road and the Snellville park and rides. And the route is anticipated to continue direct service to Midtown and downtown. However, the frequency of the buses is proposed to decrease from, again, every 15 to 30 minutes down to every 60 minutes during the morning and afternoon times. So the primary impacts for this corridor would be riders that are currently using the Stone Mountain Park and Ride board the Route 419 would shift to the Hewitt Road Park and Ride, which is again about 5 or 10 minutes further along US 78 there. So next, we'll spend quite a bit of time discussing the I-85 North corridor, as there's some pretty significant changes here. So starting off with what the corridor looks like today. So Express operates 7 routes across 4 park and rides, and that's the Express routes 410, 411, 412, 413, 414, 416, and 417. Together, these routes service 4 Express park and rides today, and that includes the Hamilton Mill, Mall of Georgia, Sugarloaf Mills, and Decula park and rides. So these routes provide service to downtown and midtown, as well as Perimeter Center, with service roughly every 30 to 60 minutes, really depending on where you're boarding the service today. So, and then furthermore, the Ride Gwinnett Commuter Services also offers additional routes today from the Indian Trail and Buford Park and Rides directly to downtown Midtown, as well as the Emory area. So the proposed service reduces this corridor down to a total of 5 park and rides, including 2 that are currently served by Ride Gwinnett. So that is the Buford and Indian Trail park and rides. So together there would be 6 express routes along this corridor that would provide direct service to downtown, midtown, and the Emory area. The frequency of the buses may decrease depending on the park and ride. However, again, definitely encourage you to go to the website and check out the proposed schedules, as that's where you'll see specific times on when the bus would be departing from a park and ride, arriving in either Midtown or downtown or Emory. So the primary impacts from an express standpoint for this corridor include customers who will be using the Mall of Georgia today currently, would shift to either the Buford Park and Ride, which is about a 7-minute drive, closer to 985 near Mall of Georgia, or the Sugarloaf Park and Ride, which is about 10 minutes further south along I-85. So one of the primary impacts for this corridor is we're looking at proposing to merge all of the Ride Gwinnett commuter bus services within Express. So that includes the Ride Gwinnett bus routes 101, 102, 103, and 110 into Express. So customers would be boarding an Express bus starting in June if those changes were to be implemented. And that includes the customers I mentioned that are going to Emory. All right. So next we're going to talk about the Georgia 400 corridor. So today that corridor is served by 2 routes, the routes 400 and the route 401, with 1 park and ride incoming. These routes provide direct service to downtown Atlanta, as well as the Perimeter Center area, with service roughly every 45 minutes during the morning and afternoons. So the proposed service scenario reduces this corridor down to 1 route, with the route 401 providing direct service to Perimeter Center at 3 MARTA stations, similar to what it does today. So the Sandy Springs, Dunwoody, and Medical Center stations. And those trips would occur every 60 minutes during the AM and PM service window. So the big change here is that customers that use the Route 400 today would need to use the Route 401 and then transfer at one of those 3 MARTA stations that the Route 401 would be connecting to. And just a reminder, if you're unfamiliar with the MARTA service in the area, as of December 2024, the red line, which is the line that serves Sandy Springs, Dunwoody, and Medical Center, is running every 10 minutes during peak times. So roughly the same time that Express would be operating. All right, and the I-75 North corridor is next here. So today that corridor is currently served by the routes 480, 483, 484, 485, and 490 at Town Center, Hickory Grove, Woodstock, and the Ackworth Park and Rides. These routes provide direct service to downtown and midtown today, with service roughly every 20 to 60 minutes, depending on which park and ride you're boarding Express at. Under the proposed scenario, the service would be reduced down to 1 route in this corridor with 2 park and rides. So the Hickory Grove and Town Center park and rides would remain. And it is anticipated that we would maintain direct service to Midtown. However, the frequency of buses would decrease from roughly every 20 to 60 minutes to every 60 minutes in the AM and PM peak from those 2 park and rides. So the primary service impacts for customers on this corridor include those that are using the Ackworth lot today would likely shift to either the Hickory Grove or Town Center park and rides, with the Hickory Grove being slightly closer, around 7 to 9 minutes of a drive. And then customers at the Woodstock park and ride, your nearest closest park and ride would be the Town Center Big Shanty lot, which is about a 7 to 10 minute drive, depending on traffic, down 575 south. Right. So the I-20 West corridor is currently served by two routes, the routes 463 and 476, across four park and rides. So the Hiram and Powder Springs lots, as well as the West Douglas Park and Ride, and then the Douglas Multimodal Transportation Center. So these routes provide direct service to downtown and midtown today, with service roughly every 20 to 30 minutes. There's 22 trips, so 11 in the morning, 11 in the evening, depending on which park and ride you're boarding at. And then the proposed service, Express actually remains the same routing and park and rides for this corridor. So we still have the 463 and the 476 across those four park and rides. However, there is a reduced frequency proposed for the corridor. So service would shift from every 20 to 30 minutes down to every 60 minutes in the AM and PM. And again, I'll reiterate to please visit the website to look at the proposed times for each of these corridors. And I encourage you to please provide feedback via the digital comment form online, as it's imperative that we ensure that we can minimize impacts to customers, particularly from a scheduling standpoint. The I-85 South corridor is currently served by one route, Route 453, at the Union City and Noonan Park and Rides, with direct service to downtown and midtown Atlanta every 30 minutes. Under the proposed scenario, the corridor would be reduced to one park and ride, so the Noonan Park and Ride would remain, with direct service to the Lakewood Fort McPherson MARTA station every 45 minutes in the AM and PM service window. And again, if you're unfamiliar with the MARTA service at the Lakewood Fort McPherson station, the red and gold line both operate from this station to both the Midtown and downtown area and serve Five Points, Civic Center, Arts Center, and multiple other MARTA stations. And as of December 2024, again, that peak frequency is every 10 minutes. So that theoretically could translate into every 5 minutes if you're staying within, south of the Lindbergh station, if you're familiar with MARTA. And then finally, the I-75 South corridor. Today, this corridor is served by six routes across six park and rides. So the route 430, 431, 432, 440, 441, and the 442 at Riverdale, Hampton, Jonesboro, Stockbridge, Brandsmart, and the McDonough Park and Rides. These routes offer direct service to downtown and midtown today, with service roughly every 30 to 60 minutes, again, really dependent on which park and ride you're using today. Under the proposed scenario, this corridor would be reduced down to two routes, so the route 430 and the route 441. The route 430 would serve the McDonough and Stockbridge lots, while the route 441 would serve the Jonesboro lot. Both of these routes are proposed to maintain direct service to the Midtown and downtown area. However, buses would decrease from every 30 to 60 minutes to every 60 minutes during the morning and evenings. So the primary impacts here are customers that are using the Riverdale or Hampton park and rides would need to shift to the Jonesboro park and ride, which is about a 5 to 10 minute drive, depending on where you're coming from. And then customers using the Brandsmart park and ride would shift over to the Stockbridge park and ride, which is just across the interstate. It's probably about 2 to 3 minute drive across I-75 there. So this is the last corridor that we'll cover for the proposed service changes. And as I mentioned, definitely go online to check out more details about each corridor, the exact changes, as well as the proposed schedules. Also online, as Kane will get to in a little bit, is the online comment form where we'd love to hear your feedback, both on the routes and the schedules that are currently available for public comment. And so finally, we'll end with the proposed downtown and midtown routing. So I know there's a lot of lines and a lot of colors going on here, and I'll walk through what each of these lines mean. But overall, in effort to minimize customer impacts, we wanted to maintain a majority of the midtown and downtown routing. So what you see here is probably very similar to how you use Express today, especially in the downtown and midtown area. So you'll note that on the screen here, you've got downtown and midtown, with downtown near the bottom of the screen and midtown up near the top. Um, each line is color coded based on the corridor that is serving the area. So the I-20 East and US 78 are in green. The I-85 North corridor is in dark blue. The 75 North is the light blue color. I-20 West is the purple color. And then I-75 South is the orange color. So I'm going to start with the routes along I-20 and South, as they have a pretty similar alignment across the board for all of those corridors. So the routes along I-20 and South, so that's I-20 East, I-20 West, I-75 South, and US 78, are proposed to have a similar routing in downtown and midtown. So all the routes from these corridors are proposed to serve both downtown and midtown with the same route, which is slightly different from today, depending on what route you're using, where you may have two routes from one park and ride today, one serving downtown and one serving midtown. In the proposed scenario, you have one route from that park and ride that would serve both the downtown and midtown areas. So as you'll see, the routes are proposed to operate primarily along Mitchell Street, MLK, Peachtree Center, and Cortlandt Street in downtown, which is similar to how Express operates today. Excuse me. And then West Peachtree Street and Spring Street in Midtown, which is again also similar to how many routes that operate at least in Midtown for Express today as well. Finally, or second to last, I should say, the 85 North Corridor, which is noted in the dark blue color here, is proposed to remain as separate routes serving downtown or midtown. So again, that's very similar to how many routes from this corridor operate today. So if you follow the dark blue in the map there, you'll notice that the routes would follow the downtown connector or I-75, 85, and then either split into the Midtown pattern, which starts at Civic Center and runs up West Peachtree towards the Art Center station area, or to downtown, which they kind of start around Peachtree Center and then work their way south from there. And then finally, the I-75 North Corridor, which is noted in light blue on the screen here, is proposed to follow the downtown connector, kind of similar to how the 85 North routes do, and then exit there and hit the Civic Center station first, the MARTA station, and then work their way north up the West Peachtree Street into the Art Center station area. So again, before I hand it back over to Kane, I'll reiterate that all of these corridor maps are online on the Redefining the Ride website, as well as an interactive map where you can zoom in on the street level and be able to see where exactly each route is going to stop in the Midtown and downtown area, along with proposed schedules again. Please take a look at those, and everything can be viewed on that website along with the public comment form. So now I'm going to hand it back over to Kane. And Kane, you're on mute.
Put yourself on mute so that you don't say something you shouldn't. And then when it's time you say something you should, you're still on mute. Sorry about that, y'all. So just want to give you a little preview of where we're headed with this effort. So again, we do encourage you to go to the website. You can dig in a little bit deeper there, review this material at your own pace and at your own time frame, and then fill out the comment form and provide us some input there. All of that input will be reviewed and considered and in light of the process for the adoption of the plan. You can use that QR code there to get to the website, but we did open a 30-day public comment period on the 13th of January. We will close that on February 12th. And so this public meeting here is a part of that public comment period. We will on February 3rd, I think, the first Thursday in February, we will be taking this draft set of recommendations to our board of directors. There is a comment period at the beginning of every board meeting. So if you'd like to come make comment to the board in person, you can do that. You'll find those agendas on the ATL website. So they will have heard the draft recommendations in early February. We'll wrap up the public comment period in the middle of February. Then we'll do our analysis and see if we need to make any changes to the set of changes that we're proposing now. And then we'll be back to our board in early April, asking them to adopt a final service plan. And so we'll be clear at that meeting about any changes that we made to the recommendations between the February and the April board meetings. And those changes would come about as a result of public comment or any other potential implications of the analysis of the system. And if the board acts to adopt a set of recommendations in April, we will implement those changes in June of this year. So that's the timeline for getting from here to the implementation of the service changes. And then I think we'll turn it back to Tiffany at this point.
Perfect. Thank you, Kane. Thank you, Hunter. We will now move into our question and answer session. As I mentioned, we have allocated about 30 minutes, but we will definitely try to get to everyone's questions within our allotted time. If not, again, the questions will be placed on the website and the answers to your questions. So we're going to make sure everybody's comments and questions are being addressed. We do have a group chat. That's where if you have anything that you would like to present, please make sure you are typing your questions in the group chat, the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. All right, well, I'm going to kick this off. I have quite a few questions here already, so I will start with our very first question. Why is the ATL proposing changes to the Express service? Again, why is the ATL proposing changes to the Express service? Hunter and Kane, you both make sure you're off of mute and you can go as you feel.
I'll take a first stab at this. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, the amount of services being offered today is more than is being consumed. And so it's the responsible thing to do to adjust service levels so that we aren't significantly oversupplying service as compared to what's being consumed. The other thing I would say, as I mentioned earlier, is that the state of Georgia, the legislature, is the entity that funds us. So the majority of our funding comes from, the three main pots of funding that support the service come from federal grants, the state budget, and from fares. Fares make up 10% or so of the amount of money that helps support the service. And then the next largest portion of that is the state funds that come from the legislature on an annual basis. And as I mentioned, when the legislature adopted the budget for fiscal year 25, which is the fiscal year that we're in now, they reduced their contribution to our budget by $4 million. We use those state dollars to match federal dollars. And so the less state dollars we have, the less federal dollars we can apply to the service as well. In addition to the reduction of the budget, they gave us direction to undertake this effort to slim down the service and then to implement those changes in fiscal year 25. And so we are obligated under the direction of the state legislature to slim down the service, reduce the amount of money that's being spent on the service, and to get all of that implemented before July 1. In addition to this being the responsible thing to do, given how much service is actually being consumed.
All right, thank you, Kane. Our next question is, how were the proposed service changes selected?
I can start with this one, Kane, and if you want to add anything. So I'm sure many of you all are familiar with the Redefining the Ride study that's been going on over the last year. So, through that, there was a lot of research into how people are traveling around the metro area today, and what the overall commuting patterns are in the region, as well as what the overall passenger demand is. So we were really looking at, how many passengers are riding each trip in and out of the metro on a daily basis. How many people are riding on Mondays versus a Tuesday or Wednesday, and how many people are riding on a 5 a.m. trip versus a 6 a.m. trip. So we really took a deep dive into a lot of the ridership data that we had available, as well as incorporated a lot of the survey feedback that we received from the passengers and the general public over the last year. So, as part of the Redefining the Ride study efforts, there was a survey completed around late last year in the summertime that really asked passengers, how likely would you be to transfer to MARTA station, or what's your tendency to drive further to another park and ride should it close? Preference on reducing midtown and downtown stops. And we incorporated a lot of that feedback into these proposed changes. In addition to the Express customer satisfaction survey data that also happened around the same time as that survey. So I'll add that we had a lot of feedback from customers that went into these proposals and recommendations for the service.
Thank you. The next question is, will service changes be reevaluated after they are implemented? Is there a chance that the ATL will bring back any cut service in the future? And I can repeat it if needed.
Yeah, I would say that we do routinely evaluate the service and make adjustments as they're needed. One of the beauties of this being a bus service is it is scalable and can respond relatively quickly to changes. So we will once we've implemented these changes, we will continue to monitor them, monitor the performance of the system, and adjust as necessary over time.
Okay. Next question. How will my feedback be used for the proposed changes? How will my feedback be used for the proposed changes?
Yeah, and I'll say that, it's critical that we gather feedback in this final input session. And I think a lot of that feedback can tie into the overall recommendations for each corridor. We've been conducting some in-person park and ride visits already this week. And some of the initial feedback is, can we shift a trip 10 or 15 minutes earlier or later to ensure that I can get to work on time, or that I can get to GSU on time. So I think it's critical that we get feedback like that. It was a delicate balance we were trying to strike in the proposed timetables that you see today, both balancing that kind of service span that exists today, from roughly 5 a.m. out to almost 8 a.m. at some park and rides, but also ensuring that we minimized the customer impacts from the trips that we did reduce.
Next question. Are there plans to increase fares?
No, we don't currently have any plans to change the fare structure.
Okay. How much notice will be given to riders about the changes?
That's a good question. I probably should have addressed that in my final slide. Sorry about that. So I'll leave the details to Hunter on what that will look like. But once the board has adopted the set of changes, we will move very quickly into a public information approach to making sure that all of the riders understand what those changes are. And then helping them find other means to work if what the final set of changes or don't meet their needs. Hunter, maybe you talk a little bit about how that public information will play out.
Yeah, I think so. As many, I'm sure there's riders on here, as many of the riders have probably seen, there's notifications on the bus already. There are A-frames, so the sandwich board posts at some of the park and rides, alerting people of the public comment period. I think we would take the same approach in informing customers of which park and rides are available, which routes are going to be serving each park and ride, and are they going downtown or midtown or maybe both. So I would say, email, definitely pay attention to Express's website and social media, and, stay on the lookout for a final service plan likely in early May, I would say.
Okay. All right, we have a question from a participant. They want to know, has the public been consulted prior to these proposed changes? Has the public been consulted prior to these proposed changes?
Yeah, good question. I think Tiffany in her opening remarks mentioned that this is the second phase of this effort. So we did have a first phase of the Redefine the Ride work, which was initiated in middle of 2023 and wrapped up in August of 2024. That effort was mainly a system planning rather than a service planning effort. So it was provided sort of the high level recommendations for the significant changes to the numbers of routes, the park and ride lights that would be served, right the stops that would be served. And we went through a number of public engagement efforts during that phase. We had three, I think, meetings with stakeholders early in that process. We did a number of social media posts as well as newsletters. There was some media coverage of that, of all of that. We also then had two public meetings, much like this one, where we shared what the draft recommendations were. And in fact, I think Hunter also mentioned earlier in his remarks that some of the public feedback we got through that process ended up impacting this revised set of recommendations, specifically, I think, with regard to the stop locations in downtown and midtown. We added some back to this set of recommendations that had not made it the cut in the first round of recommendations, and also some of the routes continuing on into downtown and midtown that in the first set of recommendations were recommended to terminate at end-of-line MARTA stations a little further out. So the public has had a fair amount of opportunity to comment already and has done a good job of impacting this set of recommendations that we're putting forward now. And this is also just a draft set of recommendations, as I think we've mentioned too. So now is the time to continue to provide public feedback and in hopes of making sure that we've been able to address as much of it as we can. The final set of recommendations will hopefully be able to reflect those changes when we get to the board meeting in April.
Thank you. The next question is, how do I make a free transfer to MARTA?
Yeah, that's a great question. So today there is what they call a reciprocal fare agreement between the operators within Atlanta. So I would encourage you to use cash value on your Breeze card. And that way, when you first tap on an express bus in the morning, maybe you're on the 85 South corridor and you're taking the express bus into the Lakewood station. Once you tap to get on the express bus, you should be able to then use that transfer to tap to get into the MARTA station, and it is a free transfer. And then when you're on your way home, say you're boarding the train at 5 Points, you would pay the fare through the MARTA fare gate at the 5 Point station, and then get that transfer when you board the express bus at the Lakewood Fort McPherson station. So I think, if you're using the cash value, you'll get the transfer between the operators within the region.
Next question. How many people have to ride the service for the service not to change? Again, how many people have to ride for my service not to change?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that, Kane, if you want to add anything. I would say there's not really a definitive answer for preventing a service change like this, but I would point to some kind of guiding principles that the ATL and Express use to determine the service levels that are being deployed. And one of those is the ATL's service standards. So the service standards exist to kind of act as guidance for how Express deploys service. And one of the things that we look at is, for example, there's a minimum of 17 passengers per trip for routes that have been operating for at least 4 years. And so really, if we're following the service standards and doing our due diligence and making sure we're using available resources efficiently, anytime we see a route that's operating below that, we would take some form of action to try to encourage better performance out of that route. So in this case, many routes and many trips today, as Kane was alluding to, due to the post-pandemic ridership loss, many of the routes that exist today are below this threshold of 17 passengers per trip. And that's really what drove a lot of this reduction as well.
Anything on to add to that, Kane? Or you
No, I
good?
think that was a great answer. Thanks, Hunter.
Got it. Next, we have how many people are currently utilizing the park and ride lots routes that are getting cut. So they want to know how many people are currently utilizing the park and ride lots or routes that are getting cut.
Yeah, I think, we would need to come back to that and if we want to provide some exact data. As Kane mentioned earlier, a lot of the park and ride lots and routes that are proposed for discontinuation were determined based on their utilization and really relative to the rest of the Express system. So, how much does the park and ride lot cost to operate? Really, as Kane mentioned earlier, if the parking ride lot was leased today, that played a pivotal role in potential closure of that lot, really an effort to reduce the operating and capital expenses for Express. And typically, what we've seen is that the higher ridership park and rides are generally the ones that Express owns as well. And so really, I don't have an answer for how many people are at each of the lots that are proposed for closure today, but they are some of the lowest ridership lots in the system.
Thank
We
you, Hunter.
we can provide that data though. We'd be glad to provide that data. We just don't have it immediately on hand today.
Okay. Next question. Will transfers to MARTA be retained after the implementation of, they put 2.0, so Express 2.0, redefining the ride. So will transfers to MARTA be retained after the implementation of redefining the ride Express 2.0?
So I think Tiffany, well, one, yes, the transfers to MARTA that you see in this set of recommendations are what are being considered at the moment. And so if the board does adopt this plan in April, you would see those transfers to MARTA. But I think also, Tiffany, they might be referring to the phase 2 and phase 3 that was we talked about in the first round of this effort. And so for those of you who may not be familiar, phase 2 and phase 3 of the implementation of the Redefine the Ride effort that was discussed in the first portion of this, the phase 1 of the study that we wrapped up in August of 2024, talked about the potential re-addition of new services to new markets for the service. The implementation of those two phases is wholly contingent on the availability of funding, which is something that we would need to be discussing with the legislature in the budgeting process going forward. And so I just want to be clear that those are potential implementations rather than planned implementations. And it is possible, or I even say likely, that the connections to MARTA would persist, depending on additional planning associated with those phases.
Thank you. The next question, a participant wants to know, with the new schedules, will the new schedules begin June 1st or towards the end of the month? So it's very specific about the timeline. Will the new schedules begin June 1st or towards the end of the month?
Yeah, I don't I don't know that we have a specific date yet. We're still sort of planning out what that looks like. There are a number of factors that go into the implementation planning, working with the service provider as well as a number of other things. So I think by the time we get to the adoption of the plan in April, we'll be able to say a little more specifically like when exactly in June the changes will take place, but I don't think we have that hard and fast date just yet.
Okay. Next question. Are there going to be free transfers to MARTA?
Yeah, I think we hit on this earlier, but I would reiterate that, using the cash value, if you have a Breeze card, or I forgot the Breeze app actually as well now, but using the cash value, if you start your trip on, Express or MARTA or Gwinnett, uh, there's a regional reciprocal fare agreement. So what that is when you start your trip on Express, you'll get a free transfer to MARTA or vice versa. So really those customers that along 85 South and Georgia 400, I think those would be the ones most impacted by this transfer. You would still get the reciprocal fare using the cash value.
Next question. A participant asks, with the new administration starting January the 20th and their push for federal workers to return to the office 5 days a week, have you considered delaying implementation to see if you might have an increase in ridership if people do have to return to the office more days per week?
So I, it's a very good question. It, I think that we will continue to see changes in the office market over time. The travel patterns will also continue to change over time, which is, as we were talking about earlier, the beauty of the bus system being able to respond relatively rapidly to those changes. But as I did mention earlier, the legislature essentially instructed us to enact these service reductions in fiscal year 25. And so fiscal year 25 ends at the end of June in calendar year 25. So we're on a track to implement these changes in accordance with the direction that we got from the legislature. But again, that doesn't mean that as travel patterns change and people return to work, that we aren't able to adjust services going forward.
Next question. Since you're only running 3 buses, why are you deleting stops? Why will the last bus leave? Why will the last bus leave so early? Many commuters don't get off until 4:30 or 5 p.m. and need time to walk to the suggested bus stop. So the initial question is, since you're only running 3 buses, why are you deleting stops? And why are many commuters don't get off until 4:30 or 5 p.m. and need time to walk to the suggested bus stops?
Yeah, I think this is critical that we hear customer feedback during this input period, particularly around, if people are getting off at 5 or 5:30 and the proposed schedule does not work for a large majority of the rider base, then we definitely want to look at changing the proposed times so that we can minimize impacts and fit within the customer's work schedules. I'll say that as far as the bus stops, if at least in Midtown and downtown, I think Kane mentioned earlier that since the initial system-wide recommendations that were adopted last summer, we have looked at maintaining a lot of the Midtown and downtown stops again. So, hopefully that reduces some of the walking and other travel time to reach Express, particularly in the Midtown and downtown area. But again, if the schedules are not working for you as they're proposed, then please let us know via that comment form.
Thank you, Hunter. The next question is, will only a single ticket be needed for Express and MARTA for the routes that include MARTA transitions? Will only a single ticket be needed for Express and MARTA for the routes that include the MARTA transitions?
Yes. So the the way that transfer actually works is like Hunter mentioned, there is a reciprocal transfer agreement between Express and MARTA. And so if you are riding the Express bus into the city in the morning and transfer to MARTA, you would pay the Express bus fee, the Express bus fare, and then you would transfer free to MARTA to complete your trip. And in the reverse, in the afternoon, you would originate your trip on MARTA and pay the MARTA fare, and then you would receive a free transfer to the Express bus in the afternoon to head back at home. So there is you would be paying two separate operators, but the transfer would be free in both directions. I hope that answers the question.
Next question. Will the My Express 2.0 app still be available and be updated to accommodate the route changes?
Yes.
Simply put, yes, got it. The My Express 2.0 app will be available. Next, do you fear you will lose riders with buses only running every hour for AM and PM rides for the majority of rides? Do you fear you will lose riders with buses only running every hour for the AM and PM service rides for the majority of the rides?
I I would I would say yes. I mean, we're not we're not unaware that significant changes to the system often result in people having to make other arrangements for their travel. It is certainly not our goal to make it more difficult for people to access the system. Our goal is always to be as convenient and customer friendly as possible within the constraints that we operate in, which are largely financial. And so we do think it's possible that we will see some initial decline in ridership, but that is a fairly typical pattern for significant service changes for all transit operators. It is to be expected, I think, that a significant service change will result in some additional decrease in ridership. But we also see the typical pattern is that over the next 18 months or so, the ridership does tend to increase once people begin to adjust to the new service patterns as well.
Thank you, Kane. The next question is, will these changes be reconsidered if the buses are overcrowded?
Yeah, we definitely do not want to have standing loads on buses that are traveling at speed on interstate highways. And so if buses do get overcrowded, we will again look at the service on a regular basis and make adjustments as necessary to accommodate that. And that could be anything from adjusting the time of the next trip to maybe move it a little closer to the trip that is overcrowded in hopes that some people might be able to shift the time of their trip to potentially adding another trip depending on what the need actually is.
Here's a pretty long question. A participant is asking, have you considered raising prices rather than cutting service? The new plan would cause me to start driving rather than taking the bus, but I would gladly pay more for bus fares rather than having to pay for gas and parking downtown. So essentially, the question was, have you considered raising prices rather than cutting service?
Um, I, I, I guess I would say that the amount that we would have to increase fares in order to account for the revenue that has been lost from the system in other ways. I'm just not sure that we could raise fares enough and still maintain ridership in order to make up that financial gap. And so we really the only way to do it is to reduce service levels at this point. And so we don't have a plan to raise fares at the moment.
Next question. A participant wants to know, what if your express bus is paid through your company, for example, a monthly card? How does that work if I need to take MARTA in addition to the bus? So I'll read this one again. It's pretty specific. What if your bus is paid through your company? How does that work if I need to take MARTA in addition to the bus?
Yeah, that's a good point. So for instance, if you have a multi-trip pass or a monthly pass that your job is paying for on our system, you would still be able to use that pass in the morning on the trip in. But in order to originate your trip on MARTA back home in the evening, you would need to, as Hunter mentioned, have dollar value, cash value loaded also onto your Breeze card so that you could pay that MARTA fare and then transfer to the Express bus on the other end.
We have a question here. It says, is there an opportunity for electric buses? Would that save money?
Interesting question. So we are at the moment considering electric buses, and we'll likely be piloting them soon. Um, I don't think it will save us um, enough money to offset the changes that we're seeing in the financial structure. Those buses do have lower maintenance costs, and the fuel costs are also likely a good bit lower. But we would not be able to replace the entirety of our fleet with electric vehicles, and those vehicles are more expensive upfront from a capital cost as compared to our diesel vehicles. And so I don't think that the finances there would work out sufficiently to enable us to not cut service.
All right, we'll take a couple more questions, and then if needed, we'll go back and reiterate some key things. Again, just housekeeping, pointing you guys in the right direction so that you can really tap in and take in this information outside of this webinar. But I'll segue back to one of our last questions. A participant wants to know, why does it appear that the South Side impacts way heavier than other areas? Again, why does it appear that the South Side impacts way heavier than other areas?
So, Kane, I can start with that if you want. So I would say the recommendations here are largely driven by the ridership on the system. And if we go back through the slides, you'll see that range of trip reductions really varies significantly by corridor. And we did our best to strike a balance between, both north-south and east-west trip reductions and maintaining really at least 3 trips per park and ride and per corridor. And think you see that largely across the board from a north and south and east and west perspective, is that we were really aiming to provide at least 3 trips in the morning and 3 trips in the evening for all corridors. And Kane, I'm not sure if you have anything else you want to add to that.
The only thing that I might add is that the potential notable exception here is the I-85 North Corridor, and the reason that would be is that there is a partnership there with the local government, assuming that that partnership actually is able to be finalized between now and the time that we implement service, that enables an additional level of service there. And so we're open to those same partnerships with other local governments across the region. But that's the only one that we've been able to advance to this state so far.
Got it. Next question. A participant says, I am understanding the proposed downtown midtown routing correctly, in that you will still make stops to places such as North Avenue and West Peachtree. So they're asking, am I understanding the proposed downtown midtown routing correctly? In that you will still make stops to places such as North Avenue and West Peachtree Street. So they're asking, are we making stops at those locations?
Yeah, if I can, Tiffany, I'm gonna jump back to the the downtown and midtown routing map. Because I think I've seen a couple comments and questions come in regarding this. So I just want to walk through this again so that everyone can kind of see how each corridor is serving the midtown and downtown area. So as I was mentioning earlier, really all the routes along 20 and south, based on the nature of how they're coming from the south and then going downtown and midtown, they all fairly follow the same routing pattern. So they would start down near the south end of downtown, so near the Garnett Station, and follow along Peachtree Center and Cortland Ave, either in the inbound or outbound direction, and make stops pretty much, every block, if not every other block. And then they'll cross into Midtown. So once they're at Civic Center, if you're dropping off, theoretically, you'll start at the Civic Center station and then drop off at the North Avenue station, West Peachtree and Fifth, which is generally right around the Tech Square area. And then again, West Peachtree and 10th, which is right on the corner of where the Midtown MARTA station is. And then there's several stops along West Peachtree between 10th and Art Center, which is up near the 16th Street. So there are many stops along all of these routes, both in Midtown and downtown. And then for the 85 North corridor, that's really where it's kind of very similar to how it is today, where you've either got a route that serves Midtown or a route that serves downtown. And for the routes that serve downtown, they're noted in the dark blue here, but they'll also be using similar streets that you see those routes run down today and similar stops, as well as in the Midtown area. The one of the bigger changes is for the 75 North corridor. So that route is proposed to primarily serve the Midtown area, starting with the 75-85 corridor. So getting off on the HOV exit lane, actually, so we can, ensure that we're using or that we have good on-time performance, if we're using the HOV lanes. So we would start dropping off at Civic Center and then head north and again drop off at those same stops along West Peachtree. And then the same thing could be said for the afternoon for the pickups. So really, I think I would encourage customers to visit this map and really explore where your routes are proposed to both pick up and drop off in the Midtown and downtown area. And we also have an interactive map where you can actually click which route you think you might be using and see the stops that you can either board or alight at in the downtown area. So, we did our best to maintain a lot of the similar routing in the Midtown and downtown area, because that was one thing we heard a lot of feedback on the Redefining the Ride survey earlier last year, was that customers really prefer to maintain the Midtown and downtown stops that exist today. So that is one major change that has occurred since we've last kind of brought this out to the public. Sorry, Tiffany, go ahead.
No, you're good. Thank you, Hunter. I think that adequately answered their question. We can move on to the next. Our next question is there possibly, should be possibility, is there, or is there possibly a demand for shuttle and vans? Maybe this is cheaper than larger buses. So they're basically asking, are we looking into the possibility of using shuttles and vans as a cheaper alternative to the buses?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would start by saying that in addition to the express bus system that ATL operates, we also operate a regional van pool program. in partnership with a private provider that is pretty successful. And we have invited that van pool provider to come out with us when we begin implementation and communicating the implementation changes to the park and ride lots, so that if riders find that the new system doesn't meet their needs, they might be able to find a van pool that would support those needs. They're very eager to participate with us in that effort, and so we'll be introducing that van pool system in a more substantial way as we go about the implementation of this program. We at the current time have not planned to change the buses that change the vehicles that the Express network operates specifically. That doesn't mean that it is out of the question in the future. But at the moment, it's just the sort of the nature of our fleet is sort of we're essentially limited to the set of buses that we have now to implement this particular service change. And as time goes on, and we're able to consider how the fleet should change, we are certainly open to the idea of operating buses of different sizes on the existing routes and any future routes that might get implemented.
Thank you, Kane. And just to piggyback off of that, information about Vanpool is on our website under commuter tools. So there's a point of contact and information on how to access your local Vanpool. Okay. Next question. We have 4 more in the queue, so we'll hopefully power through these next 4 questions. The next question they're asking, morning routes appear to be almost an hour apart. Is there any chance there will be additional trips added?
Yeah, I would say that a lot of what's driving this change, as Kane mentioned, is the budget constraints that the ATL will be facing for fiscal year 26. Not to say that there's a possibility, that in the future trips could certainly be added back should ridership return and other resources become available. I would say from an overcrowding perspective, as Kane mentioned earlier, we certainly want to continue to monitor that. Buses are traveling 60, 70 miles an hour on the interstate, and we certainly don't want someone to be standing in the aisle. And whatever actions we can take to alleviate that, whether it's shifting the schedules in the morning or the evening, to make sure that people can kind of spread out their trip as needed. That could be an alternative to that. And I'll reiterate that, the proposed times that you see on the website are draft schedules. And if there are times that are proposed that are not working for you and that would inhibit you from using Express to get to work or to get to school, we definitely want to know that, and adjust the schedules as much as we can to ensure we minimize those impacts for customers.
Next question. What's the plan to deal with overcrowding? The participant says once you actually do all of the buses, they might be overcrowded and full, and the running just once every hour. So again, what's the plan to deal with overcrowding?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think we'll continue to monitor the ridership on each trip, so the number of passengers on each trip in the AM and PM, to make sure that we're not exceeding the seating capacity on a coach bus. One thing I'll add to that is the proposed schedules that are online for viewing today were really built in effort to meet a few things. So one, we really wanted to preserve the service span as much as possible so that someone catching a trip in the first part of the morning or the last part of the morning could still find a way to use Express. Another is that we wanted to make sure that we are providing trips when Express customers need it the most, when the majority of Express customers need it the most. But then the third part of that is ensuring that we're spreading the trip times enough to not have overcrowding, ideally. So, if we see a peak at a certain time, we want to make sure that we schedule maybe more than one trip kind of around maybe slightly before and slightly after that peak time.
Next question. Are you considering the largest employers like Emory and Georgia Tech with Midtown stops? Most get on and off and on at the MARTA Civic Center. Already having to get there in the evening is a struggle. And you have one bus once an hour. So again, the big question here is, are you considering the larger employers in the area?
I mean, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure that I fully appreciate the intent of the question. So I apologize if I'm answering it in a way that doesn't get at what the questioner was really looking to understand. But as Hunter was pointing out, the stops that are showing there that we showed earlier in downtown and midtown are really meant to respond to the public engagement responses that we got the last time around, and to take into account uh, where those larger employers are. And so there are stops there that will enable passengers to get to those major employers in Midtown as well as in downtown. And on Emory, there is a route proposed that would continue to serve the Emory area. So I think that we were at least attempting to accomplish that. But as Hunter also said, if that if what you see in the presentation doesn't meet your understanding of how that would work, please submit that comment as to what you would actually like to see in the comment form on the website.
Thank you. So now we're down to the final two questions. It is 7:52 p.m. So we will go through these questions and we can always double back a little bit in the presentation. I will check the chat one more time for housekeeping to make sure there's nothing or anything highly important being put there. But again, we'll answer two more questions. So the next question that we have in queue is, what has been discussed internally to increase ridership so that express bus services can be retained rather than reduced? This is the second service reduction in less than 5 years. What has been discussed internally to increase ridership so that express bus service can be retained rather than reduced?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. And as we talked about earlier, our current perception of the reason for the reduction in ridership is the shift in work patterns. Um, I I I do think that many of the questions that we receive that point out that the possibility that large employers and the federal government even may be calling workers back into the office in these office markets could raise that ridership. Um, I We also will be, once we have implemented these changes, working with the Georgia Commute Options Program. I'm not sure if you are familiar with the Georgia Commute Options Program or not, but it is a program that helps employers and workers figure out alternative options to get to and from the office rather than driving alone in single occupant vehicles. So we'll be working with them to uh, advertise the service a little bit more, and then the over the longer haul, we'll be continuing to evaluate the service and beginning to look at potential new markets with a focus on in-person employment centers. So those places where people have no option but to go to a job in order to do that job. So we'll be looking at how those areas may be served with express buses across county boundary lines, and thinking about how we would potentially serve those areas as well. So the answer really is looking at new markets, and looking at how we might be able to promote the service a little bit better than we have in the past in partnership with the Georgia Community Options Program.
So that was actually our last question in queue. I definitely want to thank everybody for taking the time to participate. We had a really good turnout here in participants on this webinar on a Wednesday evening. I do want to redirect you again. Hunter can maybe advance the slide, but please scan the QR code on your screen. That will take you to our web page on the Xpress website. All information about Redefining the Ride updates will be consistently updated here. So this will be your main source. A follow-up from this presentation will be there with our FAQs. And we also have a YouTube channel where the webinar will likely live. So information is there. Hunter, Kane, any closing remarks?
I would just like to underscore what you just said, Tiffany. I mean, the fact that we had 150 people on a Wednesday night join a webinar speaks volumes to how much people care about the service. And we certainly appreciate that because we also care about the service. We have been intentional and deliberative about the proposed changes that we've put forward, understanding that the system really does have to change as a result of the budgetary constraints that we're operating under. And so we appreciate you all being deliberate and thinking through your responses as well. So thank you for your time tonight.
Absolutely. All right, so we'll leave the screen up for a while. This brings us to our concluding of the webinar. But again, I encourage you to please screen capture the QR code. Please go ahead and make a public comment via the comment form on the Xpress website that will be open until February the 12th so that your voices can be heard. At this time, that concludes our webinar, and we thank you so much for participating. And if we look frozen, the screen will be up until 8 p.m. So we may fade out, but we will leave the screen up. Have a great evening.